primary feeling is received or comprehended in the unit mind through the medium of the nerve cells, and so recently experienced vibrational impressions of feelings necessarily remain in particular nerve cells. There are different kinds of nerve cells in the brain to receive different vibrations, and each of these nerve cells has a particular kind of sensibility and activity. The internal reason why the unit beings have no particular difficulty in remodeling the newly acquired or newly created ideas in the mental stratum is that the vibration of the nerve cells remain in an almost undisturbed state for some time. Of course, there is an external cause as well. The causes of these newly created or newly acquired ideas remain almost undistorted for a long time, and thus help them to reappear on the canvas of the memory. With the passage of time, the impressions of the feeling in the nerve cells also become dimmed, and the relative positions of those activating causes of events also undergo change, even in the external world. When that happens, the act of reawakening those events on the canvas of memory becomes the function of the mind instead of the brain. Of course, the brain is an ID-bearing instrument. If you see a white cow now, you can easily say after 5 minutes that the cow was white because the sensation of the cow that has etched its image in your nerve cells still remains quite clear. And so neither the mind nor the brain will have any particular difficulty in activating the memory by reproducing the thought waves from it. But after the lapse of a few days, if you are asked about the cow, you will not be able to answer so easily, because the impressions of the feelings in your nerve cells will then be dimmed. Then the mind will have to extricate with much difficulty the idea of the cow from its accumulated samskaras, an act which is entirely dependent on its mental power. For the performance of various mental functions, like memorizing, thinking, perceiving, the application of crude riddhis, and the recollection of distant events, a worldly instrument is necessary, and that instrument is the brain, whose various parts help the mind in various ways. It is not proper to say that every human feeling is lastingly recorded or outlined in one or the other parts of the brain. If this were true, the brain would have to be very large, and new cells would have to be continually created in order to cope with the progressive demands of feelings and sensibilities every moment. So it has to be admitted that the lasting abode of feelings is the mind, not the brain. Even in the absence of impressions in the nerve cells, the mind can revibrate its accumulated samskaras in the nerve cells at will as many times as it likes, by means of its own force, and can also create similar impressions in them. As long as these mentally created impressions remain undistorted, memorization will be easy. When asked what you have eaten today, you may reply at once, but when asked what you ate the day before yesterday, you will take quite some time to answer. But after you reply once, if you are asked again a little later, what did you eat the day before yesterday, you will be able to answer very quickly. Both mind and brain can be diseased. If the brain suffers from any sort of abnormality, as a result of a fall or injury, the mind, although healthy, cannot function properly. There are many victims of brain disease who are called lunatics in society. When one's vital force wanes after a few days' illness, the brain becomes sluggish, and even an extremely wise and learned person becomes incapable of thinking deeply about any subject. Then again, the mind may be distorted. You are overjoyed when you receive an object which is congenial to your samskaras, but conversely, some objects fill your heart with disdainful revulsion. A particular air of music, a particular touch, a particular color, or the taste of something spicy or bitter fills your heart with annoyance. But another person may not have such reactions, and perhaps you do not always have the same feelings either. The smell of inyapi, sauce of decomposed fish buried in the ground for 3 months, may be tolerated to Indians, but the Burmese it may be intolerable to the Indians, but to the Burmese it is delightful. It cannot be said that they tolerate it just because their nervous systems are used to that smell. They love Injapi, as it is a source of enjoyment to them. They have that samskara in their minds. To love or not to love actually depends upon the mind, not upon the brain. The instinctive reaction or revulsion that we see in a Hindu at the sight of beef, or in a Muslim at the sight of pork, is indeed psychological. A mad Hindu or a mad Mohammedan will easily eat that denounced meat, for, on account of their defective brains, they will not be able to recall that instinctive reaction. There are 1,001 instances of mental aberration or perversity in human and animal society. The unit ego not only has no brain, but, from a subtle philosophical standpoint, has no mind either. The unit ego not only has no brain, from a subtle but no mind either. The I feeling that exists in the mind finds its substantiation only through a particular vibration emanating from the nerve cells. In the absence of these nerve cells, the independent I feeling is personal or impersonal, is a psychic function either of the unit mind with brain or of the cosmic mind without brain. The supramental subtle macrocosmic entity, Bhuma or Atman, however, is not in any way dependent on the nerve cells, but is only responsive to the thought waves, samvedana of the mind. As the result of the impact of a thought wave upon him, he appears to be dyed with the color of that thought, yet characteristically he is immune to everything. Cognitive responsiveness is the characteristic of the omniscient psychic ego, and it is through this cognitive responsivity that the existence of the mental perception is substantiated. In the unexpressed state of the mind, in the microcosm, in the functionless state of the brain, in the macrocosm in the absence of avikalpa, see Subháśita Samgraha, Volume 2, the responsive action also does not take place for lack of thought waves. When the cardiac function stops, and the nerve functioning also ceases, we call it the death of the body. Similarly, when the cardiac function stops, and the nerve functioning also ceases, we call it, quote, the death of the body. Similarly, when the nerve cells of the brain, along with them, the cognitive, activate and sensory thought waves of the mind also stop functioning, we call it the death of the mind. When the nerve cells of the brain, along with them, the cognitive, activate and sensory thought waves of the mind also stop functioning, we call it the death of the mind. When the thought waves stop, and the telepathic action also stops, we call the Jivatman Videhi Atman, or the bodiless soul, although that Jivatman, the subjective counterpart of the microcosm, has to remain as the witness as long as there is a mind or samskara. To call any Atman bodiless is philosophically untenable until the mind or samskaras are totally destroyed and salvation is achieved. I have already said that the brain is necessary only for the microcosms, not for the macrocosm, Bhuma. Here the question may arise, how does the macrocosm perform the functions of the mind? Why is the brain not necessary for him? A brain is necessary to determine the sense of ego as well as to direct the propensities of the sensory and motor organs. But to meet the necessity of one whose sphere of ego comprehension is immeasurable due to its vastness, is beyond the capacity of any finite quinquelemental brain. Secondly, the 5 factors of which the brain is made are created from the mind stuff of this very great I, and so for the macrocosmic mind, due to the absence of brain, none of the crude quinquelemental factors can work as the receptacle. If this is the case, then how does his mind flow? There Purusha himself is fully manifest as the mind. With the help of the material force, Prakriti, from beginninglessness to endlessness, from timelessness to timelessness, this subjectivity of mind, like form that the material force has been imposing upon him, is what we call imagination, kalpana, in which lies his potential to express his volition or purpose. The yogi in his determinate trance of absorption, savikalpa samadhi, drifts afloat his or her own mind entity on these psychic waves of Purusha. As this manifestation, which we call his psychic manifestation, is created in the original Purusha due to the influence of primordial Prakriti, his operative principle, it is tentatively imperishable, even though it undergoes many diverse forms, and every form is individually perishable. There is yet another reason why he has no brain. It is only necessary to have a brain in order to accept external ideas and project internal ones. The question of projecting anything from within or taking in anything from without does not arise for the one outside whom nothing exists. All his psychic occupations find their expression through his own internal psychic vibration. I have just told you that the responsive bearing of the Atman does not function in the absence of the mental thought waves, and that is why the term as dead, the mind devoid of thought waves that once bore the identity of the unit being. Often, due to the improper functioning of the vital airs of the body, the nerve fibers temporarily stop controlling the body, and at that stage the nerve fibers do not become completely inactive, and as a result, the mind remains intact in its causal state. In the presence of the causal or unconscious mind, karanamana, the telepathic bearing of the Atman's soul also remains active as before. A medical examination might declare such a man dead. As cremation of the dead is in vogue in Hindu society, there is no way of knowing if the person actually died or was still alive in the causal or unconscious mind. For even half-dead people are burnt as if dead, but in countries where burying the dead is in vogue, it has sometimes been found after opening the coffin that the person had come back to life again, but eventually, after struggling hard to stay alive, had courted actual death in sheer helplessness in the darkness of the grave. Thus, where there is even the slightest expression of the mind, the telepathic Atman has to be there, and on account of his existence, all kinds of physical and mental activities find their substantiation. The mind is greater than the body, and the Atman is greater than the mind. Although the mind Atman is not directly active, if his presence alone is the determining factor behind actions, then it will not be unreasonable at all to call the Atman the controller, Ishana, the one due to whose presence every act of the body and mind is performed, is the Atman. He is the sovereign master of this body-like house. Without exerting himself, he is present as the master of all. It is due to his presence that his housewife, Prakriti, his operative principle, arranges for servants and takes work from them according to necessity. He does not have to do anything, but without him the whole framework would break into pieces, and that is why he is Ishana, the controller. Whatever the activities, whatever the events, whatever the spatial-temporal personal expressions, all are taking place within him. He is the Ishana of all. Past, present, and future, everything is at his fingertips. Truly speaking, every relative factor is evolved, retained, and dissolved in his body, due to the influence of Prakriti. From the standpoint of dispassionate judgment, none of these can be accepted as truth in any particular condition. Whatever words I am uttering at present cease to be of the present immediately following their delivery, and pass into the womb of the past. And for the person at a distance who has not yet heard those words through the media of aerial or ethereal waves, they remain in the darkness of the future. To a person hearing my words at a distance of 10 cubits, they are present. To the person 20 cubits away, they are future, and to me they are past. Whatever is past, present, and future for the unit entity is for Brahma one indivisible wave, He is the supreme authority of past, present, and future, the supreme master of time. One who has the time factor in his grasp is verily the cosmic controller, Ishana, your own soul. He is you. You are not an ordinary, poor, miserable creature. Stand erect, casting off all weakness and impurity. Stand erect, the way a prince brought up in the home of a Chandala, a low-caste person, when he discovers he is not a Chandala, holds his head high and expands his chest with dignity, throwing himself into the task of establishing his honor and prestige in the kingdom of his heart. Tear away with an iron hand all the mental distortions and weaknesses of fear, hatred, jealousy, etc. from your mind and establish it upon your gem-studded throne.